Talk to me. Talk to me.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dan Gersten, host of Chatting with History, where you can listen into conversations I have with some of the most famous characters in the history of Western civilization. And today's guest is no exception. It's Adolf Hitler, considered by many to be one of the most evil men to walk the earth. Chancellor of Germany and dictator of Nazi Germany, his regime is responsible for starting World War II by invading Poland and for the deaths of approximately 6 million Jews and millions of others whom he and his followers deemed racially inferior. So without further delay, let's meet Adolf Hitler. Herr Hitler, guten Tag, and welcome to the show.
Danke, Dan. Ich bitte der Führer, bitte. All my subjects refer to me as der Führer, which means leader or guide in Deutsch. That's German.
And what did your friends call you?
Friends. A man in my position had no real friends, as I could trust no one, especially with so many attempts on my life, from those under my command.
So, you had no friends? It must have been pretty lonely.
Nein. After all, who needs friends when you have millions cheering you and lots of women throwing themselves at your feet? Friends. Ich had friends and worshippers.
Yes, unfortunately, you did. And of particular concern, you still do. Anyhow, as is customary with our guests, why don't we begin by your telling us of your childhood?
Yeah, that's a good place. I was born on April 20th in 1889 at the Gasthof zum Palmer, an inn located in Braunau am Inn in what was then Hungary, Austria, a town on the border with Bavaria. I was the fourth of 6 Kinder, that's children, born to Alois, Hitler, and Clara Polzel, although my 3 older siblings all died in infancy.
You were born at an inn? Well, I guess both good and evil people are born at inns.
What are you talking about?
Never mind. Meanwhile, back to your story.
My father was born in Lower Austria to a then 42-year-old unmarried peasant woman, Maria Anna Schlickelgruber. And at the time of his baptism, the space for his father's name was left blank, and the priest wrote illegitimate. A Johann Georg Hitler moved in with Maria, her elderly father, and him, eventually marrying her when my father was 5 years of age. Years later, when my father was 39 years old, he had Hitler declared his father, had his birth certificate amended to reflect that, and changed his last name to Hitler.
Historians have discussed at length who your father's father was, and while many do agree that it was Johann Georg Hitler, some suggest that it was his brother, Johann Nepomuk Hitler, with whom your father was sent to live when he was 10 years of age. Others still claim that your father's father was a Leopold Frankenberger, the 19-year-old son of a Jewish family for whom your grandmother supposedly worked.
What nonsense! Ich ordered the Schutzstaffel or SS, a paramilitary organization originally formed to provide security for Nazi party meetings, to investigate the alleged rumors regarding my ancestry, and they found no evidence of any Jewish ancestors. And when the Nuremberg laws went into effect in 1935, identifying who was German and who was not, I ordered a genealogist to publish a large illustrated genealogical tree showing mine ancestry, which concluded that my family were all Austrian Germans with no Jewish ancestry, and that I had an unblemished Aryan pedigree.
Guess so. But then, given your influence and power, and your tactics used to quash dissent, I don't believe that any investigation into your ancestry would turn up anything that you didn't want turned up.
Whatever.
By the way, before we continue with your childhood, I'd like to note that the term Aryan originates from Sanskrit, the primary liturgical or holy language of Hinduism, in which the word Arya is an ethnic self-designation meaning honorable, respectable, or noble. In the late 19th to mid-20th centuries, Aryan, or the phrase Aryan race, a neutral ethno-linguistic classification, was used by proponents of ideologically motivated racism and white supremacism who claimed that the Aryan race was the master race.
And why not? Somebody's got to be the master race, so why not us? Besides, doesn't everyone know that the Nordic race is the purest example of the original stock of those who were called the Proto-Aryans, those who prehistorically dwelt on the North German plain and ultimately originated from the lost continent of Atlantis?
Descendants of those who originated from the lost continent of Atlantis? Okay. Anyhow, based on the claim that Nordic peoples were superior to all other races, you and your followers believed you were entitled to expand territorially as well as enslave, expel, and exterminate those judged to be inferior and a danger to the master race. I mean, talk about corrupting a word meaning honor, respect, and nobility.
Whatever. Can we move on, bitte?
Okay, so back to your childhood.
Ja, das ist gut. When I was 3 years old, my family moved from Braunau am Inn to Passau in Bavaria. And 2 years later, in 1894, we relocated to Leonding, near Linz in Austria. In June 1895, mein Vater retired to a small landholding at Hafeld, near Lambach, in Upper Austria, where he farmed and kept bees.
And when in Hafeld, we're told that marked the beginning of intense father-son conflicts, this time caused by your refusal to conform to the strict discipline of the school you were going to, a state-supported school in nearby Fischelham.
Yeah, we really got into it sometimes. You know, before he retired and tried farming, mein Vater was a frontier guard in the Austrian Finance Ministry.
A frontier guard?
Well, think of it as being in the customs service. Still, he had the uniform, which he always wore, and he insisted on being addressed as Herr Oberofficial Hitler. When mein father was 36, he married Anne Glazel-Horra, the 50-year-old daughter of a wealthy customs official, which certainly didn't hurt his career.
I would imagine not. And we're told that he was an ambitious climber who some described as hard, unsympathetic, and short-tempered.
Yeah, that would describe him. So you could imagine how we might have gotten into it from time to time.
Well, your father was said to have been awfully rough with your mother and hard to her at home. He's even said to have beaten his children. Anyhow, I mean, what happened to your father's marriage to Anna?
Shortly after they married, or perhaps before, Anna became an invalid. Even so, Papa was a ladies' man and had numerous affairs, one of which was Miss Franziska Matzelsberger, who was also known as Fanny. This led to his wife initiating legal action and with the two of them separating by mutual agreement in 1880.
Supposedly, while all this was going on, your father met your mother.
Yeah. In 1876, while still married to Anna, Papa had hired Clara Polzel, the woman who would become my mother, as a household servant. She was 16 at the time, and the granddaughter of Johann Nepomuk Hitler, who was possibly my father's biological father or uncle, making Clara his half-sister, half-niece, or first cousin once removed.
I mean, talk about needing a scorecard to identify the players.
But?
Never mind. I understand that your father's girlfriend, Matzelsberger, demanded that Clara find another job and that she was sent away.
Yeah, seems Fanny didn't like having competition and noticed Papa's attraction to my mother. In 1882, Matzelsberger gave birth to a son, and in 1883, once his first wife died, he and Fanny married. At the time, Papa was 45 and Fanny was 21.
So, I mean, what became of your father's marriage to Matzelsberger?
Well, they had another child, another daughter, Angela. But when Watzelsberger was 23, she acquired a lung disorder. A lung disorder. And she became too ill to function. She was moved to Ranshofen, a small village near Braunau. And during the last months of her life, Clara Pölzl returned to look after the invalid. Yeah, that's it. Look after the invalid.
Wow. Sounds like some episode right out of Law and Order with a male version of a Black Widow. I mean, 2 wives, both of whom became invalids shortly after marrying your father, and all the while he's stooping his mistresses.
Whatever. Mein Vater is now married to mein Mutter.
Yes. And as we earlier learned, their first 3 children died, and you, the 4th, were born on April 20th, 1889. We understand that you were a sickly child and that your mother fretted over you.
Yeah, that's mein Mutter. So, can you blame her, having lost her first 3 kinder?
No, I guess I can't. Still, why don't you tell us of your mom?
Mein Mutter came from old peasant stock and was a hard-working, energetic, pious, and conscientious woman, described as very quiet, sweet, and affectionate.
And we're told that she was a devout Roman Catholic and attended church regularly with you, your half-siblings, and your younger sister Paula, the only other child of hers to survive childhood.
Yeah, in 1897, when mein Vater's efforts at farming ended his failure, the family moved to Lambach. There, as an 8-year-old, I took singing lessons, sang in the church choir, and even considered becoming a priest.
Wow, talk about a road not taken. I mean, still, that didn't happen now, did it?
Nein. In 1898, after being in Lambach for just a year, we returned permanently to Leonding, where 2 years later mein younger brother Edmund died from measles. His death deeply affected me, and I changed from being confident, outgoing, and an excellent student, if I say so myself, to being morose, detached, and sullen. And I constantly fought with mein Vater and mein teachers.
Your father wanted you to follow in his footsteps as a custom officer, and reportedly took you to visit a customs office in hopes of getting you to do so.
Yeah, it was an awful experience. And it gave rise to an unforgiving antagonism between him and me. And ignoring my desire to attend the classical high school and become an artist, he sent me off to Linz to a technical school. A technical school!
We're told that you rebelled against his decision and intentionally did poorly in school, hoping that once your father saw that what little progress you were making, that he would let you devote yourself to your dream of being an artist.
As if that would work, given what a stubborn bully was mein Vater.
Anyhow, on the morning of January 3rd, 1903, your father, as he always did, went to the Gasthaus Weisinger in Leonding for a glass of wine, where he collapsed and died.
Yeah, I was 13 when that happened. Can't say I mourned his passing.
Well, your performance at school continued to deteriorate, and your mother allowed you to leave school. In September 1904, you enrolled in another technical school where both your behavior and performance showed some improvement.
In 1905, after passing a repeat and the final exam, I left the school without any ambitions for further schooling or any clear plans for a career.
When your father died in 1903, he left your mother a government pension. She sold the house in Leonding and moved with you and your sister Paula to an apartment in Linz, where you lived frugally.
Yeah, and from 1905 I lived a bohemian life in Vienna, financed by orphan benefits and support from my mother. I worked as a casual laborer and eventually as a painter, why I even sold the watercolors.
Yes, but the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna rejected you twice, in 1907 and in 1908, because of what they labeled an unfitness for painting.
Unfitness for painting? What did they know, those pompous asses? I showed them.
Yes, I'm sure you did. The director of the Academy recommended that you study architecture, but you lack the academic credentials.
Again, people telling me what I can and cannot do, and lacking the academic credentials? That was my father's doing. Ah, how I hated that man.
Yes, but you loved your mother. And between rejections from the academy, she died on December 21st, 1907, at the age of 47.
Yeah, very sad. She was diagnosed with breast cancer and treated with iodoform, an antiseptic, whose toxic side effects took her life.
Ah, a case of the patient dying from the treatment of the disease and not the disease.
Whatever. I had a close relationship with my mother, and I was crushed by her death. The grief was something I carried with me the rest of my life.
It should be noted that while your mother died from iodoform poisoning, you were grateful to her doctor, an Eduard Bloch. And in 1940, you showed your gratitude to Dr. Bloch, a Jew, and allowed him to emigrate with his wife from Austria to the United States.
Again, whatever. Can we get back to my story?
Sure. In 1908, after being rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, you ran out of money.
Yeah, it was not a good time. In 1909, I was living as a homeless shelter. On the following year, I had settled into a house for poor working men.
During this time, Vienna was a hotbed of religious prejudice and racism. Fears of being overrun by immigrants from the East were widespread, and the populist mayor, Karl Lueger, exploited the rhetoric of virulent anti-Semitism for political effect. And a Georg Schonerer's pan-Germanic anti-Semitism had a strong following in the district in which you lived. Additionally, local papers, such as the Deutsches Volksblatt, fanned prejudice and played on a Christian fears of being swamped by an influx of Eastern Jews.
And your point is?
Well, I'm simply illustrating what was going on in Vienna, during the time in which you lived there, and wondering whether this is where your anti-Semitism originated and was first expressed.
Whatever. I had a number of Jewish friends at the hostel in which I lived. And as far as Georg Schonerer's pan-Germanic views, like many Austrian Germans, I developed German nationalist ideas from a young age and expressed loyalty only to Germany. I despised the declining Habsburg monarchy and its rule over an ethnically diverse empire. By my friends and I even used the German greeting Heil and sang the Deutschlandlied instead of the Austrian imperial anthem.
In May of 1913, you received the last of your father's estate and moved to Munich, a move that some believe was to evade conscription into the Austrian army.
Perhaps. I did not wish to serve the Austro-Hungarian Empire because of the mixture of races in its army. Regardless, on February 5th, 1914, in Salzburg, I took a physical exam, was deemed unfit for service, and I returned to Munich.
On July 28th, 1914, World War I broke out, and you volunteered to serve in the Bavarian army as an Austrian citizen.
Yeah. I was posted to the Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment 16 and served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front in France and Belgium.
We're told that you spent nearly half of your time, well behind in front lines.
I was present at the first Battle of Ypres, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Arras, and the Battle of Passchendaele. And at the Somme in October of 1916, I was wounded in the left thigh when a shell exploded in the dispatch runner's dugout. I spent almost 2 months in the hospital before I returned to my regiment.
And you were wounded again.
Yeah. In October 15, 1918, I was temporarily blinded by a mustard gas attack and again hospitalized.
It was during this hospital stay that you learned of Germany's defeat, and by your own account, suffered a second bout of blindness.
The war was the greatest of all experiences, and I was praised by my commanding officers for my bravery. Why, I was even decorated, receiving the Iron Cross, second class, in 1914, and the Iron Cross, first class, as well as the Black Wound Badge in 1918.
Of note, it was Hugo Gutmann, your Jewish commanding officer, who recommended you for the Iron Cross First Class, a decoration rarely awarded to those of your rank, which was the equivalent of a corporal. Some even believe that Gutmann may have even pinned the medal on you himself. In 1939, Gutmann and his family escaped to Belgium just as World War II was beginning and migrated to the U.S. just prior to the invasion of the Low Countries.
Whatever.
It's said that you took Germany's defeat in the Great War personally.
I was embittered over the collapse of the war effort. Like many other Germans nationalists, I believed that the German army, undefeated in the field, had been stabbed in the back on the home front by civilian leaders and Marxists.
This belief, now referred to as the stab in the back myth, was widely held in right-wing circles in Germany. Namely, that the German army was betrayed by November criminals who used the end of the war to seize power and create the Weimar Republic, the Federal Republic and semi-presidential representative democracy established in 1919 in Germany to replace the imperial form of government.
Myth. What myth? The Weimar Republic was a morass of corruption, degeneracy, and ruthless persecution of the honest national opposition. Germany and real Germans suffered under 14 years of rule by Jews, Marxists, and cultural Bolsheviks, and that Treaty of Versailles that they signed brought national humiliation.
The Treaty of Versailles ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers, and is not to be confused with the actual armistice signed on November 11, 1918, which ended the actual fighting. The treaty stipulated that Germany had to relinquish several of its territories and demilitarize the Rhineland, and it imposed economic sanctions and levied heavy reparations on the country. Lastly, it firmly declared Germany responsible for the war.
Whatever.
So, World War I is over. Now what?
Ich returned to Munich, trying to remain in the army for as long as possible. In July 1919, I was appointed an intelligence agent of a reconnaissance commando unit of the Reichstag Fire, the military organization of Germany created in 1919. I was assigned to influence other soldiers and to infiltrate the German Workers' Party.
The German Workers' Party, in German known as the DAP, was founded in Munich on January 5, 1919 by an Anton Drexler, who was also a member of the Thule Society, an occultist group that believed in Aryan supremacy and which had those wishing to become members swear a blood declaration of faith that there was no Jewish or colored blood flowing in them and in their wives, and that none of their ancestors were members of the colored races. Together with Kahr, Thule Society secretary, Drexler established the DAP, whose members met periodically for discussion with themes of nationalism and racism directed against the Jews.
Yeah. While monitoring the activities of the DAP, I became attracted to Drexler's anti-Semitic, nationalist, anti-capitalist, and anti-Marxist ideas, and agreed with his views for a strong, active government, a non-Jewish version of socialism, and solidarity among all members of society. I also met Dietrich Eckart, another of the party's founders, who became my mentor, exchanging ideas with me and introducing me to a wide range of people in Munich society.
While attending a party meeting, you got involved in a heated political argument with a visitor, and in vehemently attacking his arguments, you made an impression on other party members with your oratory skills, which led Drexler inviting you to join the DAP, which you accepted, becoming the party's 55th member.
Yeah, though I was the 7th executive member of the party's Central Committee. I gave my first speech for the DAP on October 16, 1919, and quickly became the party's most active orator. drawing flocks of crowds to hear my speeches during 1919 or 1920, and I became chief of propaganda for the party.
Yes. It's said that you enjoyed the role of being a drummer for a national cause and saw propaganda as a way to bring nationalism to the public. In 1920, to increase its appeal, the DAP changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, more commonly known in English as the Nazi Party.
At first I was against the name, but was persuaded to accept it. Still, I did design the party's banner of a swastika in a white circle on a red background.
In February 1921, you spoke to a crowd of over 6,000 in Munich, and to publicize the meeting, 2 truckloads of party supporters drove around town waving swastika flags and throwing leaflets.
Yeah, I sure knew how to advertise an event. But I gained notoriety for my rowdy and controversial speeches against the Treaty of Versailles, rival politicians, and especially Marxists and Jews. And around this time, Nazi newspapers began agitating for a boycott of Jewish businesses.
In June 1921, while you and Dietrich Eckart were on a fundraising trip to Berlin, a mutiny broke out within the Nazi Party in Munich, when members of the executive committee, some of whom considered you to be too overbearing, wanted to merge with the rival German Socialist Party.
The nerve of those ingrates after all I had done to grow it and gain popularity. I angrily quit the party, and then soon committee members realized that my resignation would mean the end of the party. So they gave up thoughts of merging. I rejoined the party but faced opposition. Mine enemies had my good friend Hermann Esser expelled, and they printed 3,000 copies of a pamphlet attacking me as traitor to the party. Me! It was they who were the traitors.
In the following days, you spoke to several packed houses, defending yourself and Esser, speeches which were received with thunderous applause. And at a general membership meeting, you were granted absolute power as party chairman, with only one nay vote cast.
And I believe that voter came to regret his decision.
Your angry and vitriolic beer hall speeches began attracting regular audiences, and you became adept at using populist themes targeted at your audience, including the use of scapegoats, who could be blamed for the economic hardships of your listeners. Historians have noted the hypnotic effects of your rhetoric on large audiences and of your eyes in small groups. And famed psychiatrist Carl Jung speculated that your allure was that you were the first man to tell every German what he had been thinking and feeling all along in his unconscious about German fate, especially since the defeat in the World War.
Some of mine earlier followers included Rudolf Hess, Hermann Goering, and Ernst Rohm, who headed up our paramilitary organization, the SA, more commonly known as the Stormtroopers or the Brown Shirts, on which protected our meetings and attacked political opponents. Additionally, a group of exiles from Russia, who were financed with funds channeled from wealthy industrials, introduced me to the idea of a Jewish conspiracy, linking international finance with Bolshevism.
In 1923, after enlisting the help of World War I General Erich Ludendorff, you attempted a coup that's known as the Beer Hall Putsch.
Yeah, I wanted to take over Bavaria and then challenge the government in Berlin, like Benito Mussolini did in his March on Rome the year before. Ludendorff and I sought the support of State Commissioner Gustav Ritter von Kahr, Bavaria's chief de facto ruler, but he, along with the Chief of Police Hans Ritter von Seisser and Reichswehr General Otto von Lossow, wanted to install a nationalist dictatorship without me. Without me!
On November 8th, 1923, you and your SA stormtroopers stormed a public meeting of 3,000 people that had been organized by Kahr in a large beer hall in Munich. You interrupted Kahr's speech, announced that the national revolution had begun, and declared the formation of a new government with Ludendorff. You then, with handgun drawn, got Kahr, von Seisser, and Lassalle to support you, and forces initially occupied the local Reichswehr and police headquarters. However, those who under duress said they would support you, well, they didn't, and neither the army nor the state police joined forces with you.
So what? I was determined on the next day, my followers and I marched from the beer hall into the Bavarian War Ministry to overthrow the Bavarian government.
Yes, but the police dispersed you, and 16 Nazi Party members and 4 police officers were killed as your coup failed. You fled to a friend's house where on November 11, 1923, you were arrested for high treason, a crime for which you were found guilty by the Special People's Court in Munich and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment at Landsberg prison.
It was no big deal. Ich received friendly treatment from the guards and was allowed mail from supporters and regular visits by party comrades. And while the Nazi Party and its affiliated organizations were banned in Bavaria, it still existed, temporarily headed by Alfred Rosenberg. Plus, the Bavarian Supreme Court issued a pardon, and I was released from prison on December 20th, 1924. All told, including time on remand, I only served 1 year. And attempting to overthrow the government? What fools.
It was while you were there that you supposedly wrote your 2-volume Mein Kampf, or in English, My Struggle.
Yeah, I was devoted entirely to the book, and I began dictating it to my deputy, Rudolf Hess. I must say that I wanted the title to be 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. But my publisher felt it needed to be shorter.
The book laid out your plans for transforming German society into one based on race, and some chapters even implied genocide. It was dedicated to Thule Society member Dietrich Eckart and influenced by the passing of the Great Race by Madison Grant, an American eugenicist, lawyer, and amateur anthropologist who theorized Nordic superiority and argued for a strong eugenics program in order to save the waning Nordics from inundation of other race types.
The passing of the Great Race. It was my Bible. And in Mein Kampf, my main thesis was of the Jewish peril, that there was a Jewish conspiracy to gain world leadership.
You, sir, are deluded. However, here it is, 2014, and far too many people still believe that there's some Jewish or Zionist conspiracy to take over the world.
Whatever. The book was very popular, and I made money from it. With the first volume published in 1925 and the second in 1926. By 1933, 1 million copies were sold.
What's even more scary and upsetting is that as of January 8th, 2014, Mein Kampf is the top seller in Amazon.com's propaganda and political psychology section and 12th in the politics and current events section of the iTunes e-book store. Anyhow, back to your story. On December 20th, 1924, you were released from prison.
Yeah. On January 4th, 1925, I met with Heinrich Held, Prime Minister of Bavaria, and agreed to respect the authority of the state, promising that I would seek political power only through the democratic process. This paves the way for the ban on the Nazi Party to be lifted, although I was still barred from public speaking until 1927.
Yet the party grew, especially in northern Germany, largely due to your appointments of Gregor Strasser and Joseph Goebbels. And in 1928, the party received a little over 800,000 votes, or 2.6% of the votes cast, to win 12 seats in the Reichstag.
But we were more than twice as popular before I went to prison, having in May of 1924 32 seats in the Reichstag. But then I was in prison, Plus, the period from 1924 to 1929 was known as the Golden Era. And with an improving economy, my opportunities for political agitation were limited.
But in October 1929, when the stock market in the United States crashed, that all changed.
I'll say, when the market crashed, millions of Germans were thrown out of work. Several major banks collapsed, and the party and I were prepared to take advantage of the emergency to gain support, promising to repudiate the Versailles Treaty, strengthen the economy, and provide jobs.
The Great Depression in Germany provided a political opportunity for you, as Germans were basically ambivalent to the parliamentary Weimar Republic, which faced strong challenges from both right and left-wing extremists. Moderate political parties were increasingly unable to stem the tide of extremism, and the German referendum of 1929, which formally renounced the Treaty of Versailles and made it a criminal offense for German officials to cooperate in the collecting of World War I reparations, that helped elevate Nazi Party ideology.
Yeah. The referendum was spearheaded by nationalist politician and media baron Alfred Hugenberg, who set up the League of many right-wing organizations to campaign together, including my Nazi Party. He admired our dynamism and youthful enthusiasm and gave us free publicity in his widely read newspapers, making me a household name in Deutschland.
And by having the Nazi Party campaigning for the referendum, alongside other mainstream right-wing parties, it gave you a credibility you had previously lacked. The elections of September 1930 resulted in a new chancellor, Heinrich Bruning of the Center Party, who governed through emergency decrees from President Paul von Hindenburg and with a minority cabinet.
And in those elections, the Nazi Party rose from obscurity to win 18.3% of the vote, over 6.4 million votes in total, and 107 parliamentary seats, becoming the second largest party in parliament.
Chancellor Bruning's austerity measures brought little economic improvement and were extremely unpopular, which you exploited by targeting political messages, specifically at those most affected by the inflation of the 1920s and the Depression, such as farmers, war veterans, and the middle class.
Yeah, not unlike today in much of the world, especially in those countries which enacted austerity measures, thinking they would be effective. Why, even in the United States, there are right-wing politicians seeking to pass austerity measures and then blame the left for the plight of those most affected by them, such as farmers and war veterans, and whatever middle class is still left in America. Glad to see my policies still being used by the right.
Tell me about it. Meanwhile, during this period from 1931 to 1932, the Nazi Party's policy of anti-Semitism continued, and SA brown shirt thugs physically prevented customers from entering Jewish shops, windows were systematically smashed, and Jewish shop owners threatened.
They were not wanted or welcome, and Germans should only patronize other Germans.
Anyhow, in February 1932, the Interior Minister of the German state of Brunswick, who was a member of the Nazi Party, appointed you as administrator for the state's delegation to the Reichsrat in Berlin, which along with the Reichstag made up the legislative bodies during the Weimar Republic. And in so doing, he made you a German citizen.
Yeah. While I had formally renounced my Austrian citizenship in April 1925, I did not acquire German citizenship, and for almost 7 years I was stateless, unable to run for public office and facing the risk of deportation. However, that changed when I became a German citizen in 1932.
And in that year, you ran against von Hindenburg in the presidential elections, having the support of many of Germany's most powerful industrialists.
Again, not unlike many of the right-wing politicians in the United States today.
Unfortunately. Anyhow, you lost that election.
Lost? Nein. Just being a viable candidate was a victory. I garnered more than 35% of the vote, and the election established me as a strong force in German politics.
Anyhow, the lack of an effective government prompted two influential politicians, Franz von Pappen and Alfred Hugenberg, as well as several other industrialists and businessmen, to write a letter to von Hindenburg, urging him to appoint you as Chancellor of a government independent from parliamentary parties, saying it could turn into a movement that would enrapture millions of people.
It's good to have influential and wealthy friends.
I thought you said you didn't have friends.
At one time I did.
After two further parliamentary elections in July and November of 1932 did not result in the formation of a majority government, von Hindenburg reluctantly agreed to appoint you as Chancellor.
Yeah, I was to head a short-lived coalition government formed by the Nazi Party and Hugenberg's German Nationalist People's Party. Ha! Short-lived.
And though your rise to power was about to be realized, you and your party, well, they continued your attack on Jews.
Sure, it was easy to use the centuries-old hate that resided in Christian Germans toward Jews, and it helped divert attention away from mine becoming their dictator.
At Christmas 1932, the Central Office of the Nazi Party organized a nationwide boycott of Jewish businesses, and German businesses, particularly large organizations like banks, insurance companies, and industrial firms such as Siemens, increasingly refused to employ Jews.
And many hotels, restaurants, and cafes barred Jews from entering. On the resort island of Borkum banned Jews anywhere on the island. Still, this behavior was pretty common in Europe at the time, and not just in Germany, though we may have been more extreme in our treatment of Jews.
And it should be noted that anti-Semitism has been on the rise in much of the Western world today. Meanwhile, on January 30th, 1933, the new cabinet was sworn in. In addition to you becoming Chancellor, two other Nazis were appointed to important posts. Wilhelm Frick to Minister of the Interior, and Hermann Göring as Minister of the Interior for Prussia, positions which allowed you to gain control over the police in much of Germany.
Smart moves, yeah?
In a meeting with German military leaders on February 3, 1933, you spoke of conquest for Lebensraum in the East and its ruthless Germanization as your ultimate foreign policy objectives.
Yeah, it was a law of nature for all healthy and vigorous peoples of superior races to displace people of inferior races, especially if the people of a superior race were facing overpopulation in their given territories. We needed living space, and the only way to obtain that space was to expand territorially.
As Chancellor, you worked against any attempt by your opponents to build a majority government, and this stalemate resulted in the government being dissolved and with new elections being scheduled for early March 1933. On February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building was set on fire, which Göring blamed on a communist plot with a Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe the perpetrator. Today, the consensus of historians is that van der Lubbe did set the fire, although some are of the opinion that the Nazi Party itself was responsible. Regardless, at your urging, Hindenburg suspended basic rights and allowed detention without trial. Activities of the German Communist Party were suppressed, and some 4,000 Communist Party members were arrested. And in the days preceding the March election, the Nazi Party engaged in paramilitary violence and the spreading of anti-communist propaganda.
On election day, the Nazi Party's share of the vote increased to 43.9% of a total of over 17 million voters. And we won 288 seats, the largest number of seats in Parliament.
And following the victory, there was widespread violence and hooliganism directed at Jewish businesses and individuals. Jewish lawyers and judges were physically prevented from reaching the courts, and in some cases, the SA created improvised concentration camps for prominent Jewish anti-Nazis.
What better way to celebrate our victory?
Still, you failed to secure an absolute majority, necessitating another coalition with the German Nationalist People's Party.
Yeah, but we brought the Enabling Act to a vote in the newly elected Reichstag to change that.
Yes, the Enabling Act was a 1933 amendment to the Weimar Constitution that gave the German cabinet, in effect you, the power to enact laws without the involvement of the Reichstag. It passed both the Reichstag and Reichsrat on March 23, 1933, after both houses were assembled at the Kroll Opera House, with ranks of your SA stormtroopers both inside and outside the building. And it was signed by President von Hindenburg later that day. The act stated that it was to last 4 years and for all intents and purposes gave you full power, making you the dictator of Germany. Combined with the Reichstag Fire decree, which had abolished most civil liberties and transferred state powers to the Reich government, these two bills brought the Weimar Republic to an end.
And good riddance. It was now the time of the Third Reich.
In March of 1933, Prince Bernhard Wilhelm von Bulow, a secretary at the Foreign Office, issued a statement of major foreign policy aims: Anschluss, or union with Austria, restoration of Germany's national borders of 1814, rejection of the military restrictions under the Treaty of Versailles, the return of former German colonies in Africa, and a German zone of influence in Eastern Europe.
I found von Bulow's goals to be too modest. Still, in speeches I gave during this period, I stressed the peaceful goals of my policies and the willingness to work with international agreements. At the first meeting of my cabinet in 1933, I must admit that I did prioritize military spending over unemployment relief.
Well, so much for promises to help the unemployed. And not unlike what right-wing Congress members have been attempting to do for the past 6 years. Nothing to help the economy or put people back to work while seeking to increase military spending. On April 1st, 1933, the Nazis carried out their first nationwide planned action against Jews, a boycott targeting Jewish businesses and professionals.
Well, they had it coming. They were boycotting German goods.
Yes, the nerve of them. Anyhow, on the day of the boycott, the SA stood menacingly in front of Jewish-owned department stores and retail establishments and the offices of professions such as doctors and lawyers. The Star of David was painted in yellow and black across thousands of doors and windows with accompanying anti-Semitic slogans. Additionally, throughout Germany, acts of violence against individual Jews and Jewish property occurred.
Jews were our misfortune, and they needed to leave Germany and go to Palestine.
A week later, on April 7, 1933, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service was passed, which restricted employment in the civil service to Aryans, meaning that Jews cannot serve as teachers, professors, judges, and other government positions. Jewish government workers, including teachers in public schools and universities, were fired. Doctors followed closely behind, and Jews were barred from claiming any rights as war veterans, although 35,000 German Jews died in the Great War serving Germany.
Whatever. But it didn't just go after Jews.
No, you didn't. Having achieved full control over the legislative and executive branches of government, you and your political allies begin to systematically suppress the remaining opposition. The Social Democratic Party was banned, and all of its assets was seized. On May 1st, 1933, with many trade union delegates in Berlin for May Day or International Workers' Day activities, SA stormtroopers demolished union offices around the country. And on the next day, May 2nd, all trade unions were forced to dissolve and their leaders were arrested, some of whom were sent to concentration camps that were hastily erected in February 1933, immediately after you became chancellor and the Nazi Party was given control over the police with the appointment of Frick and Göring.
Yeah, not quite like the camps where you send your children.
No, not in the least. These camps, expanded after the Reichstag Fire, were used to hold and torture political opponents and union organizers, and they held around 45,000 prisoners by 1933.
But when in 1934-35, Heinrich Himmler's SS took full control of the camps, only about 3,000 inmates remained.
But they were then used to purge German society of so-called racially undesirable elements, such as Jews, criminals, homosexuals, gypsies, and others.
Well, you can't let perfectly good facilities go to waste now, can you?
Well, it's clear that you couldn't. On July 14, 1933, the Nazi Party was declared the only legal political party in Germany, and even your one-time ally, the German National People's Party, had to disband and its leader, Hugenberg, was forced to resign.
But I still had to contend with opposition within my own party, und mein Seitz turned to the SA.
Yes, you decided to move against the SA and its leader, and once ally, Ernst Rohm, because you saw the independence of the SA and the pension of its members for street violence as a direct threat to your newly gained political power.
Yeah, and I wanted to conciliate leaders of the Reichswehr, the official German military who feared and despised the SA. In particular, Rohm's ambition to absorb the Reichswehr into the SA under his leadership.
Rohm also was an advocate for a second revolution, to redistribute wealth, which didn't sit too well with your wealthy industrial supporters.
No, it did not. So something had to be done.
Well, between June 30th and July 2nd, 1934, that something was done. Sometimes referred to as the Night of the Long Knives, a purge took place in which many political murders were carried out. Leading figures of the left-wing Strasserist faction of the Nazi Party, along with its figurehead Gregor Strasser, were murdered, as were prominent conservative anti-Nazis such as former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher and Gustav Ritter von Kahr. In addition, many of those killed were leaders of the SA.
It was quite a success.
Well, I guess it's how one measures success.
Whatever.
All in all, at least 85 people died during the purge, although the final death toll may have been in the hundreds. And more than 1,000 perceived opponents were arrested, including Ernst Rohm, who was later shot while in jail. Most of the killings were carried out by the Schutzstaffel, more commonly known as the SS, and the Gestapo, which was the Nazi secret police.
The purge strengthened and consolidated support of the Reichswehr for me and provided a legal grounding for my regime as the German courts and cabinet quickly swept aside centuries of legal prohibitions against extrajudicial killings in order to prevent mine disfavor. It's good to be a dictator.
After the purge, your regime went into full damage control and spin cycle. Göring instructed police stations to burn all documents concerning the purge, and Goebbels used the July 2nd radio address to describe how you had narrowly prevented Rohm and Schleicher from overthrowing the government and throwing the country into turmoil. On July 13th, in a speech to the Reichstag, you basically proclaimed yourself the supreme judge of the German people, and that for all time to come, that if anyone raises his hand to strike the state, then certain death is his lot. And shortly afterwards, the law regarding measures of state self-defense was signed, which retroactively legalized the murders committed during the purge.
Und while the international community and some Germans were shocked by the murders, many in Germany saw me as restoring order. Ha!
In October 1933, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations and the World Disarmament Conference.
There was little reason to belong to those organizations, as they only sought to restrain Germany and me from destiny.
On August 2nd, 1934, President von Hindenburg died.
Ah, what a glorious day that was.
Yes, I'm sure. The day before, the cabinet enacted the law concerning the highest state office of the Reich, which stated that upon von Hindenburg's death, the office of president would be abolished and its powers merged with those of the chancellor, thus making you head of state as well as head of government. And while this law violated the Enabling Act, no one objected.
And why would anyone object? I was formally named as Führer and Reichskanzler, that's leader and chancellor. And the new law removes the last legal remedy by which I could be removed from office. As if that would ever happen.
As head of state, you became supreme commander of the armed forces, and the traditional loyalty oath of servicemen was altered to affirm loyalty to you personally rather than to the office of supreme commander or the state.
I was the state. And the merger of the presidency with the chancellorship was approved by 90% of the electorate voting in the plebiscite.
Also in August 1934, you appointed Reichstag President Hjalmar Schacht as Minister of Economics, and in the following year as Plenipotentiary for War Economy, in charge of preparing the economy for war. Reconstruction and rearmament were financed through printing money, seizing the assets of people arrested as enemies of the state, including Jews, and MIFO bills.
Ah, brilliant man, that Hjalmar Schacht. He created a limited liability company, which was called MIFO for short. It had no actual existence or operations and was solely a balance sheet entity. Still, it issued MIFO bills as bills of exchange, convertible into Reichsmarks upon demand. These bills provided the way for the Reichsbank to lend the government money that it normally or legally could not do, and enable Germany to legally rearm without leaving a paper trail.
And I have little doubt that those in today's financial industry are playing the same type of games with phony corporations in order to hide and make money.
Yeah, I have little doubt too, since they learned from us. Why, some may even be descendants of Nazi Party members.
In March 1935, you announced an expansion of the Wehrmacht to 600,000 members, 6 times the number permitted by the Versailles Treaty.
I also announced the development of the Luftwaffe, our Air Force, and an increase in the size of the Kriegsmarine, our Navy.
Britain, France, Italy, and the League of Nations condemned these violations of the treaty. I mean, didn't that bother you?
Bother me? Why would it bother me? I knew they were incompetent and impotent, more talk than action. Besides, 3 months later, in June of 1935, the Anglo-German Naval Agreement was signed, which allowed German tonnage to increase to 35% of that of the British Navy.
It said that you considered the signing of that agreement the happiest day of your life, believing it marked the beginning of an alliance you had predicted in Mein Kampf.
Yeah, but that alliance was not to be, since the British had believed the agreement was a way to limit our rearmament. Still, neither France nor Italy were consulted by Britain before the signing, which directly undermines the League of Nations and sets the Treaty of Versailles on the path toward irrelevance.
On September 15, 1935, you presented 2 laws, known as the Nuremberg Laws, to the Reichstag. The laws banned sexual relations and marriages between Aryans and Jews, and were later extended to include gypsies, Negroes, and their bastard offspring.
Yeah, we had to protect the integrity and pureness of the master race.
The laws also forbade the employment of non-Jewish women under the age of 45 in Jewish households and deprived so-called non-Aryans of the benefits of German citizenship and from participation in German civic life.
The Nuremberg laws also classified people with 4 German grandparents as German or kindred blood, while people were classified as Jews if they descended from 3 or more Jewish grandparents. A person with 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents was a Mischling, a crossbreed or mixed blood. Only non-Jewish white Europeans were classified as Aryans.
And to celebrate the laws, books judged to be Jewish were publicly burned in elaborate ceremonies. Plus, Jewish-owned businesses were gradually forced to sell out to non-Jewish Germans.
Why do you insist on talking about how we dealt with Jews and other undesirables? There are other things to talk about. Unemployment fell from 6 million in 1932 to 1 million in 1936. And I oversaw one of the largest infrastructure improvement campaigns in German history, with construction of dams, autobahns, railroads, and other civil works. And we sponsored architecture on an immense scale. Albert Speer, who was instrumental in implementing my classicist reinterpretation of German culture, led the renovation effort for Berlin. And then there was the 1936 Summer Olympics.
Yes, the Games of the 11th Olympiad, held in Berlin in August of 1936, for which Germany built a new 100,000-seat track and field stadium, 6 gymnasiums, and many other smaller arenas. You also installed a closed-circuit television system and a radio network that reached 41 countries, with many other forms of expensive, high-tech electronic equipment.
Yeah, we pulled out all the stops. I saw the Games as an opportunity to promote my government on the ideals of racial supremacy.
The official Nazi Party paper wrote in the strongest terms that Jews and black people should not be allowed to participate in the game. But when threatened with a boycott by other nations, you relented and allowed blacks and Jews to participate. Plus, the party removed anti-Semitic signs from the city's main tourist attractions, though Berlin's police chief was indeed authorized to arrest all gypsies and keep them in a special camp.
Well, we needed to put ourselves in the best possible light. And our athletes did just that. All told, Germany won 89 medals, 33 more than the United States, which came in second place. And we won 33 gold medals, the most by a country, and 2 of our gymnasts each won 3 gold medals.
Yes, Germany did well in the Olympics, though the individual medal winner was America's Jesse Owens, a black who won 4 gold medals in the sprint and long jump events. And when Owens won the 100-meter sprint in front of you, you snubbed the opportunity to shake his hand and quickly left the stadium.
Whatever.
It should be noted that 5 months earlier, in May of 1936, Germany reoccupied the demilitarized zone in the Rhineland in violation of the Versailles Treaty. And that in July of that year, you sent troops to Spain to support General Franco after receiving an appeal for help.
We did what we had to do.
In August of 1936, the very same month as the Olympics, you ordered Hermann Göring to implement a 4-year plan to prepare Germany for war within the next 4 years.
Again, we did what we had to do.
In November of 1936, Germany signed the Anti-Comintern Pact with the Empire of Japan, which basically said that in case of an attack by the Soviet Union against either of them, that the 2 countries agreed to consult on what measure to take to safeguard their common interests, and that neither country would make any political treaty with the Soviet Union.
Again.
Yes, you did what you had to do.
And a year later, in November of 1937, Italy also joins the pact. thereby forming the group that would later be known as the Axis powers.
In early 1938, you moved against two senior military officials in order to consolidate your hold over the military. In what is known as the Blumberg-Frisch affair, you forced your war minister, Field Marshal Werner von Blumberg, to resign by using a police dossier that showed Blumberg's new wife to have a record for prostitution. And you removed Army Commander Colonel General Werner von Frisch after the SS produced allegations that he had engaged in a homosexual relationship.
Those two men fell out of favor with me because they had objected to my demand to make the Wehrmacht ready for war as soon as 1938. I assumed Blumberg's title of Commander-in-Chief, thus taking personal command of the armed forces, and I replaced the Ministry of War with the High Command of the Armed Forces headed by General Wilhelm Frick.
And on the same day, 16 generals were stripped of their commands and 44 more were transferred, all being suspected of not having been sufficiently pro-Nazi.
And by early February 1938, 12 more generals had been removed. You can't have people who aren't fully loyal to you.
On March 12, 1938, you declared unification of Austria with Nazi Germany in the Anschluss, and the German-speaking Republic of Austria ceased to exist as a fully independent state. Power was transferred to Germany, and Wehrmacht troops entered Austria.
It was what the people wanted. A month later, a plebiscite was held, and almost 100% of those voting favored the annexation.
And with Austria annexed, you turn your attention to Czechoslovakia and the ethnic German population within its Sudetenland region, specifically the border districts of Bohemia, Moravia, and parts of Silesia located in Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. In late March of 1938, I held a series of secret meetings with Konrad Heinlein of the Sudetenhome Front, the largest of the ethnic German parties of the Sudetenland. We agreed that Heinlein would demand increased autonomy for Sudeten Germans from the Czechoslovakian government, thus providing a pretext for German military action against Czechoslovakia.
Long story short, Heinlein demanded Sudeten autonomy from the Czechoslovakian government, a demand which ultimately was agreed to. But Heinlein wanted more, and he instigated a series of violent clashes with the Czechoslovakian police that led to the declaration of martial law in certain Sudeten districts. On September 29, 1938, you, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier, and Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini attended a one-day conference in Munich that led to the Munich Agreement, and which handed the Sudeten districts over to Germany.
Ha! Munich Agreement. More like the Munich Appeasement. Why, I even was selected Time Magazine's Man of the Year for that summit. But I was disappointed that there was no war and viewed it as a diplomatic defeat.
Over the two-day period of November 9th and 10th, 1938, a series of coordinated attacks against Jews throughout Germany and parts of Austria were carried out by SS stormtroopers and non-Jewish civilians in what is now known as Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, because of the shards of broken glass that littered the streets after Jewish-owned stores, buildings, and synagogues had their windows smashed, all while German authorities looked on without intervening. At least 91 Jews were killed in the attacks, and 30,000 were arrested and incarcerated in concentration camps. Jewish homes, hospitals, and schools were ransacked. Over 1,000 synagogues were burned, 95 in Vienna alone, and over 8,000 Jewish businesses were destroyed or damaged. Kristallnacht is viewed by many historians as the beginning of the final solution and the Holocaust.
If only they had all gone to Palestine. But they didn't.
On March 15, 1939, in violation of the Munich Accord, you ordered the Wehrmacht to invade Prague, And from Prague Castle, you proclaimed Bohemia and Moravia a German protectorate. And in private discussions that year, you declared Britain the main enemy to be defeated, and that Poland's obliteration was a necessary prelude to that goal.
Well, we needed to secure our eastern flank, and having Poland as a satellite state was one way of doing that. But on March 31st, 1939, Britain guaranteed Polish independence.
In a speech on April 1st, you threatened to denounce the Anglo-German naval agreement, and 2 days later, you ordered the military to prepare for invading Poland on August 25th. On April 28th, you renounced both the Anglo-German naval agreement and the German-Polish non-aggression pact.
Yeah, but I was concerned that the military attack against Poland could result in a premature war with Britain. And then there was the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin.
Still, your foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, assured you that neither Britain nor France would honor their commitments to Poland. And the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression pact between Germany and the Soviet Union, which included a secret agreement to partition Poland between the two countries, well, that took care of any immediate concern with the Soviet Union.
But Britain and Poland signed the Anglo-Polish alliance on August 25th, and that pompous Italian ass, Mussolini, indicated that he would not honor an alliance between our countries. So I postponed attacking Poland until September 1st, in the meantime trying to maneuver Britain into neutrality by offering them a non-aggression guarantee on the last-minute peace plan that there was no way that they could act upon, so they could blame them for the imminent war.
On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Western Poland under the pretext of having denied claims to the free city of Danzig and the right to extraterritorial roads across the Polish corridor, which Germany had ceded under the Versailles Treaty. On September 3rd, England and France declared war on Germany, but did not immediately respond. And on September 17th, Soviet forces invaded eastern Poland. And thus began the Second World War.
Yeah, it was a good time to be thorough, and the war started off well. In April 1940, we invaded Denmark and Norway. In May 1940, we attacked France and conquered Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium, prompting Italy to get active and join with us.
And on June 22, 1940, France surrendered and British troops were forced to evacuate by sea from Dunkirk.
And when Winston Churchill, the new British leader, rejected my peace overtures, I launched air attacks against him in what became known as the Battle of Britain.
But when the Luftwaffe failed to defeat the Royal Air Force, you realized that air superiority for invasion of Britain could not be achieved, leading you to order nightly raids on British cities, including London, Plymouth, and Coventry.
We were determined to beat them, one way or another. Plus, we all had these bombs, and you can't have good bombs go to waste now, can you?
Well, I could. Anyhow, on September 27, 1949, the Tripartite Pact was signed in Berlin by you and representatives of Japan and Italy, a pact which was expanded to include Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, thus yielding the Axis powers.
I also wanted the Soviet Union to join us, but when talks were inconclusive, I ordered preparations for a full-scale invasion of the Soviet Union.
In the spring of 1941, German forces were deployed to North Africa, the Balkans, and the Middle East.
Yeah. In February, we arrived in Libya to bolster Italian forces. In April, we invaded Yugoslavia and then Greece. In May, we sent troops to support Iraqi rebel forces fighting against the British, and we invaded Crete.
On June 22, 1941, contravening the Hitler-Stalin non-aggression pact of 1939, 5.5 million Axis troops attacked the Soviet Union, having the capture of Moscow as a primary objective.
We conquered a large area, including the Baltic republics, Belarus, and West Ukraine. And after the successful Battle of Smolensk, I ordered the army to halt its advance to Moscow and temporarily divert its panzer or tank groups north and south and aid in the encirclement of Leningrad and Kiev.
This change of direction was something with which your generals disagreed, and your decision caused a major crisis among the military leadership. And the move away from Moscow allowed the Red Army to mobilize fresh reserves. When the Moscow offensive was resumed in October 1941, it was short-lived, ending disastrously for you in December of 1941.
Whatever.
On December 11, 1941, 4 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Germany formally declared war against the United States. In late 1942, German forces were defeated in the Second Battle of El Alamein in Egypt, which marked a major turning point in North Africa, ending any plans you had for occupying Egypt and taking control of the Suez Canal, thus gaining access to the Middle Eastern and Persian oil fields. Plus, that battle revived the morale of the Allies, as it was their first major decisive victory since the war had begun.
Whatever.
The turning tide led you to become distrustful of your Army High Command, and you began to interfere in military and tactical planning with damaging consequences. In the Battle of Stalingrad, your repeated refusal to allow for withdrawal led to the total destruction of your 6th Army, with over 200,000 Axis soldiers killed and about 235,000 taken prisoner. And after a decisive defeat at the Battle of Kursk, your military judgment became increasingly erratic. Further, during this time, Germany's military and economic position deteriorated. Well, along with your health.
Yeah, the war was not going well, and I was feeling lousy.
And things weren't going to get any better. The Allies invaded Sicily in 1943. Mussolini was removed from power and Italy soon surrendered. And throughout 1943 and 44, the Soviet Union steadily forced your armies into retreat along the Eastern Front. Then, on June 6, 1944, the Western Allied armies landed in Normandy. Making matters worse, many of the Army's officers concluded that defeat was inevitable and that your misjudgment and denial would drag out the war and result in the complete destruction of Germany.
It was getting so I could trust fewer and fewer of those around me.
Between 1939 and 1945, there were many plans to assassinate you, some of which proceeded to significant degrees. The most well-known came from within Germany in July 1944, when German colonel and aristocrat Klaus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb where you were having a meeting.
Yeah, it was a narrow escape, but I got even, and more than 4,900 people were executed as a result.
By late 1944, both the Red Army and the Western Allies were advancing into Germany. And when an offensive in the Ardennes, known as the Battle of the Bulge, when that failed, as well as attempts to negotiate a peace with Western allies and convince them to join you in fighting the Soviets, well, you turned against Germany, feeling it had forfeited its right to be a nation.
Just like in the Great War, the people of Germany sold our nation out. So I ordered Albert Speer to destroy all German industrial infrastructure before it could fall into Allied hands.
In late April 1945, the end was near. Holed up in a bunker, you placed your hopes on an undermanned and under-equipped army detachment to turn back the Red Army, which had entered Berlin. On April 22nd, when you learned that an attack by this detachment didn't happen, you assembled your top commanders and launched a tirade against their treachery and incompetence, proclaiming the war lost and that you would stay in Berlin, well, until the end, and then shoot yourself.
But first, I married my longtime companion Eva Braun in a small civil ceremony after midnight on April 29th. And then, of course, I had to dictate a will.
Later that afternoon, you were informed that Mussolini had been executed, which presumably increased your determination not to be captured. On April 30th, with intense street-to-street fighting within a block or two from your bunker, you and Eva Braun committed suicide. She by biting into a cyanide capsule, and you by shooting yourself. Your bodies were carried up and out of the bunker and into a bombed-out garden behind the Reich Chancellery, where they were supposedly placed in a bomb crater, doused with petrol, and set on fire.
Guess you could say I went out in a blaze of glory, and I wasn't captured.
Yeah, I mean, if one considers killing themselves glorious.
Whatever.
Your death has been likened to a spell being broken, and few Germans mourn your passing. Your actions and Nazi ideology are almost universally regarded as gravely immoral, bringing about a world war and leaving behind a devastated and impoverished Eastern and Central Europe. Germany itself suffered wholesale destruction, and your policies inflicted human suffering on an unprecedented scale, responsible for the genocide of an estimated 19.3 million civilians and prisoners of war. Additionally, 29 million soldiers and civilians died as a result of military action in the European theater of the war, leaving millions grieving their lost ones. Historians, philosophers, and politicians often use the word evil to describe the Nazi regime, and many European countries have criminalized both the promotion of Nazism and Holocaust denial.
Whatever. History has a way of being rewritten, and as those who lived during those times die off, it will be rewritten amidst the tragedy and horror fading into visions of glory and empire.
Well, I surely hope not. Anyhow, we've just about run out of time, and though it pains me as a host, I have to thank you for coming on the show. As is customary, do you have any parting words for our audience?
Yeah, I was known as a great orator. Guess you could say I gave good speeches. To begin with, I have lost a great war, but the battle is not over. After all, the seeds of fascism and the belief in the master race were planted long before I came to power, and those seeds still grow today, waiting for the right time to once again sprout and give forth the fruit of hate, slavery, destruction, and death to those we deem inferior. Yeah, those seeds are just waiting to sprout, and their fruit harvested in Europe, elsewhere, and in the United States, where many corporate, religious, and political leaders once embraced me and the Third Reich, and whose descendants are now planning and paving the way for our rebirth. Now, I and many of the Third Reich leaders may have died, but many of us survived and spread like a virus throughout Europe and into Africa, Asia, and the Americas, including the United States. And there we waited and planned for the day that the Reich will rise again, much as some in the United States wait and plan for their South to rise again. The South. A fertile ground for our white supremacist beliefs since they had been rooted there from before America's independence. And now, with the election of an inferior race as its president, our time is fast approaching. Yeah, together amidst a mass of Americans whom we've purposely kept ignorant and hateful and fearful, we will rise again. And thanks to our controlling much of the wealth in America, we now own politicians who make laws that favor us, judges who disperse our justice and rule in our favor, and media outlets that spread our propaganda. Ah, what a country is the United States. Far better than was Germany. And given it's clearly the most powerful nation in the world, what better country in which to create our Fourth Reich? Your freedoms and form of government make it easy for us to spread our tentacles throughout your nation, one state at a time, working behind the scenes while we pull the strings of our puppets. And your economic system is easy for us to rig, further enriching us while creating hardships among those whose fear and hate we can manipulate. Yeah, our time is once again near, and the American Fascist Party is alive and well in the United States, disguised among the fragmented right wing of your political system. Anger, frustration, and hate are building among your ignorant supporters, and incendiary words are increasing in frequency. Can domestic violence be far behind? And when this happens, the media we own will step up with the rhetoric that your government is no longer working, much as we did in the Weimar Republic. And more people will demand change. They will demand greater security. They will demand a stronger hand at the helm. They will gladly give up some of their rights to feel safe and that their interests are protected. And that's when we will once again emerge triumphant. All hail the Fourth Reich. Heil dem Vierte Reich.
Wow. I mean, words to heed from one of the most evil entities the world has known. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm more than a little concerned. No, make that extremely concerned, given what Adolf said. For there's a lot of truth in it, and it's not that hard to imagine the scenario he painted happening. Well, unless, of course, you're one of the relatively ignorant, fearful, and hateful folk who support right-wing policies and positions. Hell, you probably don't even realize that you're being played by the forces of evil. I mean, given how they use your religious beliefs against you. I mean, bottom line for me is that I'm with Adolf in believing that the American Fascist Party is alive and well, and that there are predatory, greedy, wealthy people in this country who are pulling the strings of elected officials and judges to gain even more wealth, power, and influence. And that they now control most of our media, using it to spread their propaganda and attack American institutions, politicians, and Americans themselves. I mean, whom they don't own and whom they consider inferior. I mean, make no mistake, there are far too many people in the United States who believe that they're the master race, and that others, liberals, union workers, academics, gays, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and even women are inferior. So until our next Chatting with History, this is Dan Gersten, reminding all of you who believe that America should be a nation with liberty and justice for all, to stay vigilant. Thank you for watching.
Talk to me. Talk to me.